Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Correll, and I am pleased to be here with a good friend, Jan Jeremias. Jan and I have been doing this together now. I don't know, it seems like about a year and a half, maybe longer. The neat part of it is that we get on and we really kind of don't have anything to talk about except for our guiding light and principle is empowerment. And somewhere during the hour or so that we're chatting with each other, we're going to glance off of that topic sometimes, and sometimes it'll be a direct hit. I'm always excited when it's a direct hit because I know we got there for you, the listeners at home, if I'm getting goosebumps or my eyes well up. So, all that said, those are the physical signs for me. How about you, my friend?
Oh, I just, it's moments where I think I almost think of it as like wisdom and clarity. Like things become just clearer. And it could be in any direction. Like that could be clear about stuff that's, you know, and then the reframing of all that, like the reframing of the way I look at things, which because I think we tend to look at something in a very like almost myopic kind of very one focused direction, and it's the ability to be able to see beyond something that we normally don't see or a way we don't normally look at something.
Yeah, there's a kind of a familiarity with the way that we look at new things, like we already know something about it. And in many cases, we miss out on what's really going on because our mind is very subtly telling us there's nothing there to be interested in.
Yeah, either that or we make, like we always talk about, you make judgments or you label things before they're ready to be, before you're really the need to label. Is there a need to label? That's another story, but that's what we do. We label or we identify things because that's how we navigate the world, or we think we
If
should
we're
navigate.
awake, I was going to say, if we're awake, we notice that we did that. If we're not awake, we just do it and defend it to the death.
Right, exactly, exactly.
So here's the thing: we're already in the second week of February, 2025. I have to tell you, from my perspective, 50 years ago, this was not an eventuality that I ever thought would be possible. Several different things going on in my family. One is almost all the men on both sides of my family, and there were quite a few of them. They all smoked and drank, and funny enough, ended up having heart attacks or strokes and stuff like that when they were in their late 50s and gone. So if that didn't get them, we also had this thing called Huntington's disease on my mom's side, which is transmitted by gene, and it doesn't skip a generation. So there was that. And then you remember duck and cover, getting underneath the desk because we're going to have a nuclear holocaust. But before, if you hear the sirens, get under your desk and cover your head. So how
Mhm.
did we have a chance to get to 2025 with all of that going on?
You know, good question. I have my philosophy on that. Um, yeah, I mean, it's always very interesting when to me, it's almost like when I hear people say, "Oh, so and so has good genes," and I think mm, that's true, but there's so many other factors that play into that
Yeah.
that I think is, as we've all evolved and science has evolved, you realize that just because you're genetically predisposed or supposedly predisposed to something doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. And, and like you said, with everything that's going on now, part of me is like, part of me wonders, like, there was always something happening. There was, like you talked about, there was always some sort of something where somebody had to where like you had to get under a desk, or there was always something like external which people were kind of like a threat, or people perceived threat, which people were always
Yeah.
um surrounded by.
Sure. And you may be too young to remember this, but for a minute back in the 1960s, they were talking about the second ice age coming around the year 2000.
Yeah, I don't know that I remember that.
You can actually Google it. It's a thing.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. um
You know,
yeah.
that inspired people like Rod Serling on the Twilight Zone to write stories about people who uh, thought that they were burning up because they were getting closer to the sun. At the end of the deal, the guy wakes up and it's actually a blizzard outside and it's 25 degrees below zero. He was just dreaming about it being hot.
Yeah, Twilight Zone, what a great show.
I think what was nice about it was the the ability to tell stories. We talk about that a lot because stories is our stock in trade with the opportunity to deliver wisdom to somebody and have them viscerally and viscerably too, that's a cool word, participate in what actually happened in the telling and the receiving of the tell of the story. So I used to love sitting around with my aunts when I was living in Colorado, and we'd go back and visit, in the day, and hearing them tell stories about my grandfather that I'd never met, and other members of the family that were long gone by then, and other members of the family that had moved across the country that I hadn't met. And in the telling of those stories, when I finally did have another occasion, to either meet somebody I hadn't met before, I had a new respect for who they were, and in many cases, I had the opportunity to get excited about meeting them again. So
I'm contributing to a book right now. So it's seven of us, and we're all telling basically our story, a shortened version of our life story. Um, and it's really interesting because I think not only do you want to meet people, but I think when you hear people's stories, all of a sudden you start to examine or look at your own story. And that's the gift to me of stories. One is they're memorable. So you're going to might not remember anything about a person, but you're going to remember their story or a story they told you.
right.
And the other thing is, it really, and I really do believe this, the more we tell our stories, the more we give other people to kind of own theirs and to kind of share their story.
Yeah.
And there is this element of what we've all learned throughout this whole process of us being on this project together, and we've is like all the shared experience, like the shared wisdom that's come out of what we've learned from what's happened to us and our own story, and how that wisdom is shared in common between all of our stories. So it's kind of beautiful, like those threads of similarity and the fact that stories unify
Right.
versus differentiate.
They do. They do. And to me, it just seems like having stories to share and having the capacity to live and have a story delivered to you, uh, is to be empathetic in both directions, both for yourself as a listener and a speaker, and for the person who's telling you their story. Simply because it's one thing to speak, into a dark room with no one there and tell your story, like going out and protesting the unfairness of life to the stars and the moon. It's not really rewarding. There's nothing coming back. But to see a look of recognition, or just acknowledgement of another human being when you're saying what you're saying, a little nod of the head or the blink of the eye, while they're listening, or maybe a thoughtful, twist of the head, with the chin out to the side or whatever. It's a participative kind of a thing. It takes a group to do it, and two is the smallest group I think that it really works well with.
Yeah, I would, yes. Not to say that, I mean, I think journaling is really when you share your story within yourself. And maybe it's a way for you to start to process your own story on a different level, on a certain level, let's just say that. Um, and to acknowledge that you have a story, and and that's why I feel like everybody has a story to share. Like everybody, if you've lived on this planet, if you've lived life, you have a story to share. And so I think that, sharing with yourself is really powerful in some ways, because I think people live in a place of denial a lot of times, or don't really allow themselves the experience of living their own story, or just seeing what they've been through, or examining those things. And I think that's very valuable. But there is nothing like sharing a really powerful story, or sharing a story and then having somebody come back to you. And then what happens, and I might have mentioned this, I don't know if I mentioned it here. So I was on my audio Zoom event. And so this woman was talking, and we were talking about journaling actually. And she was talking about the fact that she needs to use a number two pencil. So first of all, if you're from the US, you understand like the sort of the humor of that number two pencil, because every standardized test you ever take growing up, you have to use a number two pencil. So so all the people from the US started to like chuckle, because we're all sitting there going, "Oh, number two pencil." And she talked about the fact that her father was an architect. And so how that experience of writing with a pencil was like, he always wrote with a pencil because he
Right.
was an architect. And I said my father was an engineer and always had a mechanical pencil. Like that was like the thing. But now to this day, when I speak to her, I will remember that story. Like I remember that her father was an architect, and that even though in the back of my mind, I might not bring it up, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, and when she journals, she has to use that number two pencil. And it makes me smile because it reminds me of my childhood. So it was such a silly story, but yet it made me laugh. And it kind of connected me in some way to her and our shared stories of like our fathers. And I was like, and all of a sudden it seemed like it was such a simple demonstration to me
Yeah.
of the power of a story.
Yeah. I particularly like the example of journaling, and it brings to mind, when I first started journaling, there was always like this background thought in my head: am I doing this right? Is there a way of journaling that I don't know yet, that once I know that, I'll have the keys to the kingdom, sort of thing, right? But when I really finally got the value of journaling, was kind of the same experience in terms of public speaking. When my attention stopped being on my own performance, like how am I doing as a journalist, to just expressing myself and noticing that a half hour or 45 minutes went by when I thought it was 10. um, it's the same kind of a phenomenon with just authentically being there and genuinely opening up and writing. It's the thoughts that you're having so quickly, to the best of your ability. Oh, I don't remember that, but that doesn't matter. Let's just get on to the next one, because there's something here that I haven't said before, which is always very refreshing. First time for anything is very cool.
Yeah, and I think that, I've journaled on and off. I can't say I'm a consistent journaler um through the years. But listening, and was talking, we were one of the things. So we talked about journaling that day, and not the do's and don'ts, but the different types of things that you can journal about, and people sort of basically people's like methodology around journaling, like how they approach it and what they do. And it was
Right.
really interesting. Like one woman said she's committed to writing every day, even if she writes it to like a shopping list, like that goes in her journal. Like just that sort of discipline of like every day I have to write or I want to write. And if some days she just feels like nothing is coming out, but she writes down something. And I thought that was so interesting. It was kind of like, it's so interesting to me to like, one is like to look at it as this kind of discipline of I'm going to journal every day. And even if I don't, it's kind of like the equivalent of I'm going to meditate for a few moments every day. And certain days, like you like so are not in that meditative space. Like your mind's 1,000 places, and you haven't like you haven't focused on your breath for for like a fraction of that. But you sat down for however long it was, and you had the discipline to do it, and then you let it go because you don't label it. Like that's the other thing I found with journaling is I had to get over like the labeling of like this was a good day or this was a bad day, I meditated. One of my clients always said, "Oh yeah, I meditated really well today," and I'm always like, it's not good or bad. It just is. Like, it's not like I don't like to label it as good or bad.
Yeah. We're really funny, the dichotomies that we set up, where it's an either or situation. It's a very young way to look at the world, but it's the best we've got at the moment, right? But you stop and think about it. My two daughters, when they were sort of, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years, the first thing, in terms of trying to understand what new things that they saw, the older daughter was, you know, does it bite? You know,
I
There's a year and I mean, there was the two phylum in the universe were the biters and the non-biters, okay? And if it doesn't bite, then she knew she could throw herself full force at it. Now, number two daughter was a little bit more subtle. She would say, "Can you pick it up?"
Can you pick it up? I love that. It's always like, is it to me, it would probably be, is it hot?
Yeah,
That would be another one. Is it hot? Is it hot or can I
you know,
touch it kind of thing? So
we didn't coax and what we didn't have any vote on what they said when they started determining how they were going to process the world in terms of being safe interacting with things and what have you. But the neat part of it was is they gave us a big tell in terms of their personalities. Heidi, the older one, has always been roll your sleeves up, dive in, and work till it's done. Take on the hard jobs, bawling, crying, whatever it takes, get the damn thing over with, right? And Becky's always been, the complainer, the one who got the job done, but she let you know and punished you every last second that she was doing it.
right,
They
right.
both they both do amazing things, and now that they're both in their mid 40s, and that's kind of sobering to think of it in terms of that. I thought I was going to be old when I was 20, thinking about me being 45. And now I've got these two young ladies that are blessings in my life. They're both wizards. They're both good human beings. They're both very sophisticated ladies. And they're the kind of people that can give me counsel now that they have more than just two things and two ways to relate to the world.
Right, right. It is interesting with that whole idea to me of the way kids look at the world and exploration. Like
Yeah.
the whole idea of exploring your surroundings and the fact that I don't know, the whole idea of discovery and learning about things. And you can see it so like it's like you can see it so much so when you watch children and how they function in the world and how they navigate. And my neighbor across the street has like, I guess she must be like a year and a half year old. And I just love, she was out today and I just love watching her. Like you can just see it. The other day they were out shoveling together. You know, just makes me laugh and
Yeah.
smile at the same time, like and just this idea of seeing things for the first time. And I think we have that opportunity, like when we look at the world, even if no matter how old we are. It's-
Yeah. There's so many different ways. I mean, thinking about all of the young folks, and I'm talking about 5 years and under, the way that I've seen them all kind of interact with the world, especially when they were interacting with me in the world. And on my trip to Florida this past year, I have a friend who's been a friend on Facebook, I don't know, since 2008 or 2009. Now she's a realtor down on the west coast of Florida. And in my driving around, I stopped to see her and looked at some real estate there. But she's got a granddaughter who at the time was 4 years old. And it was the strangest thing because when I came into their foyer, they have this long stairway going all the way up to the second floor where their condo is. And the little girl's name is Corinna, and she's absolutely precocious as all get out. So she comes down the stairs and she sees me and she looks at my beard. And when she gets to the fifth stair from the bottom, she leaps into my arms like we've never met before. And she just like knew I was going to catch her, you know? And
Love
she
that.
looks up to me and she says, I love you. She didn't know my name.
Right. It doesn't know your name. It doesn't matter what your name is. That's it doesn't matter what your name is. I also love the way, there is something about the way kids think.
Yep.
The fact that their logic and the way they put things together and the way they ask questions. And and it just makes you smile because they say it with such there's a I'm with my I'm at my great nephew's bar mitzvah. So I'm
Yep.
talking to my 3-year-old nephew who loves to ask me about Tonka the dog. And he says to me, "So where is he?" I said, "Oh, he's staying with my friend Cindy." And he turns to me with like all seriousness and he says, "That's because dogs don't go to bar mitzvahs." And I said, "No, no, they don't." I mean,
He's got it all figured out, right?
yeah, exactly. And it was like such a sweet question. It was like, oh, like really, not because, where I was or whatever, but just the way he approached it. It was like, oh, and so it was just so funny. It just cracked me up.
Well, and no two kids are alike. You know, it's really it's kind of a fun thing. When I was working at Electric Boat, riding into work with my dad, who also worked there, and then we had a carpool with another man, and his name was Dick, and he had two little girls. One was 5, and the other one was 3. But the 5-year-old, he goes, "She's driving me crazy. She's asking me questions. Daddy, why are trees?" What do you mean, Kelly? What do you mean, why are trees? Why are trees what? No, Daddy, just why are trees? You know,
That's right.
think about it for a minute. That is a very cool question. That's a question that somebody who's gone their entire life and still hasn't found the meaning of life. Why are effing trees?
Right. I remember flying like taking my nephew. He must have been about 10, 12 years old. On his first flight, we flew down to my parents in Florida. And I remember getting on the plane with him, flying, being with someone who had never flown before,
Yeah,
a little kid who had never been on an airplane. And he's asking me 1,000 questions about what's this, what's that, why does that work that way? You know, I mean, it was, and all of a sudden you look at it with such a fresh way.
yeah,
And I think that, people will ask me, how I can still practice yoga. Like, I mean, I've been practicing for a long time and they're like, "Don't you get bored?" I say no because I'm different every day. So I wake up knowing that my practice is going to be different every day. So
right.
it always surprises me. It's always this element of surprise, of unknown, of like, okay, well, what's it going to be like today? And so I never get bored, as opposed to other things that I've done through the years where now I would probably approach them very differently, but originally didn't have that same newness, that same idea of like each moment is a new beginning, is, a new opportunity. Like it wasn't, but could we look at life like that? Like, could we look at each encounter as being new? And so this way we let go of judgment, because when we sit down with someone, it's like the first time we've ever had talked to them. It's our first podcast, Bill.
No, we do that every week, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But I've been thinking about this idea of reframing, and I was my topic last week, and I've been really focusing on this, and I thought it was hysterical. Was I met this wonderful woman, Darlene, and Darlene was talking about that she has a post-it note on her computer that says "have to" versus "get to" versus "blessed to," and I thought, oh, like all of a sudden, she said she has it there, and I thought to myself, how often do I say I have to do this? And when I use those words, all of a sudden it becomes a chore. Like it becomes something like a task that I have to get done versus I get to do this versus taking it a step further, meaning I'm blessed to be able to do this. And I thought about that and even just things I love to do. Like I have to get practice yoga. I'm like, I love to practice yoga. And so I'm sitting there going like, why do I use that word? Like, why do I lump it with the stuff that like I have to do? And why don't I separate out like, or even not even use? So she said she doesn't have a to-do list anymore. She has a ta-da list, which I absolutely loved. I just and but it was just such an interesting like change for me as I sat down and I was like being a big to-do list person. Like my to-do lists have to-do lists. So it's and I love having it to, don't get me wrong. I love the satisfaction of being able to write things off when I finish them. And but there is something about shifting that mindset or shifting those words around, because if I get to do it, there is this idea, and be blessed to do it, there's this idea of appreciation. Like I
Yeah.
really feel appreciative of the fact that I have the opportunity to do something.
Yeah. The neat part of that is the I think the powerful coaching inside of all of that is that we don't realize, nor do we take responsibility for the fact that we are actually the authors of our own existence. What comes out of our mouth directly corresponds to the quality of that we report of how things are going after the fact, before the fact. And this whole notion of positivity, um, there are some pitfalls potentially in being a very positive person all of the time, especially if you're BSing yourself, as opposed to framing and reframing in a way that whatever comes out of your mouth is always going to be positive. Um, with the background of the conversation always being, if were in a position to write my story, would I write my story in such a way that it's totally enjoyable all the time, or would I be stingy with myself and make it a hard existence that really is like a blood and guts physical world that I barely enjoy getting out of bed in the morning? And the neat part of that is that how you say your first sentence every single day. And I know people, the very first thing that they say out loud so they can hear their own voice is, "What a beautiful day this is." No matter what's going on. What a beautiful, I mean, it could be pouring rain or snow and sleet, no power in the house. What a beautiful day. Terrific.
Well, and I agree with you. And it was interesting because as I was talking about um this, and as I was chatting with Mary Jane and we were having this conversation, and I'm thinking about, and it's not like, to me, you're living in a world, when I say that, a false positivity. What I'm doing is just threading in an element of positivity in the way I speak. And I'm not saying like, you know, and maybe it's just the idea of being able to, like I said, is it's a way to cultivate gratitude and appreciation. So the fact is, yes, I might have things on my list that are have tos, but there are definite things on my list that I get to and I'm blessed to. And, it's just that threading of positivity. And when you were talking about getting up, and it was reminding me of a poem by David White, the poet David White. It's called The House of Belonging, and one of my favorite all-time poems. But he said, I awoke this morning in the gold light, turning this way and that, thinking for a moment it was one day like any other. But the veil had gone from my darkened heart, and I thought it must have been the quiet candlelight that filled my room. It must have been the first easy rhythm with which I breathed myself to sleep. It must have been the prayer I said, speaking to the darkness of the night. And I thought, this is a good day. You could meet your love. This is the gray day. Someone else, someone close to you could die. This is the day you realize how easily the thread is broken between this world and the next. But this idea that getting up and it being a day, you know, just this day. And it's just like we get up and, depending on our, let's say, what we're predisposed or how we're kind of wired, I want to say, in some ways, with this attitude. But getting up, and for me, one of the first things I love to do is I love, no matter what, I'm a big, like, I look outside and I look at the sky, no matter what it is. It's kind of could be blue, it could be gray, it could be foggy, it could be misty. And there's just this idea of awe, this feeling of awe, of like real appreciation of the way the light's coming in. Um, and like I said, I mean, I love foggy days. I love that mist. I think it's mysterious and kind of, I don't know, it feels like you're living in a cloud or something. I have this image. But I just love to do that each morning. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've been, and I've been doing for a long time. It's kind of like I get up and I'm like, okay, well, what's the sky going to be like today? Without checking my weather app, kind of thing, which I don't do necessarily, except for temperature because it's cold and I have to decide how I'm going to dress because I have to go outside. But this real idea of, like you said, wow, what a beautiful day. For me, it's like, oh, what an awe-inspiring day.
Yeah, I love it. And I just have this tenet that I picked up a long time ago. What you argue for, you get to keep. So either you're going to create your future or somebody else is. And I think the other people who create your futures, if you allow them to do so and they're speaking, they're probably not going to have the same commitment to you having a great life as I hope you do. Okay. So why not be the author of something that's extraordinary? I used to have a couple of friends that I just thought were, um, I'm going to use a technical term, but this is how I languaged it at the time. They were just batshit crazy. Okay. Like, what is wrong with you that you're always talking about these little mundane things like they're the most precious, beautiful thing in the world, and handing me a candy wrapper like you just gave me the winning lottery ticket for $1 million, like a gift. And, you know, but the point is that when she did it and she offered it up to me and she put it into my hand and opened it up and it was like a chewing gum wrapper. And I looked at her and she goes, isn't it beautiful? And I go, you are batshit crazy. What's wrong with you?
Well, it reminds me of something very silly, but what you're saying reminds me of, when and you have kids that do this too. It's,
Right.
when, like, when a kid gets a gift and the wrapping is even better than the gift itself,
Exactly.
or those meaningful things which are just like, the The idea that you can get a homemade gift from somebody, like my mother, I went down to Florida to see my mom once, and my mom's been pretty good about trying to purge everything, like trying to get rid of stuff that's old, like, you know, like my father kept everything. So like tax returns from 1980, kind of thing, like, and so she's got it, but she hands me this like vanilla envelope and she says, "This is stuff I cannot get rid of." And in it, what's in it? It's like handmade cards we made, like this stuff which is just like is so heart and love. And that's what
Yes.
I think of. It's kind of like when you have something you keep that could be ratty and old, but you can't part with it because it just has such great like the beautiful, beautiful memories that you keep. Like I still have my last dog. I still have Casey's collar. I can't get rid of it. Like it just stays there. I also have her stuffed toy that she had for all 19 years I had her, which she
Yeah.
used to carry around in her mouth, and that was her toy. And I think those things like the gum wrapper is sort of like the miraculous in the really mundane.
You see, that was you're brilliant. You're absolutely spot on because that was the great awakening, the great dawning for me is the childlike behavior that this grown up was willing to be vulnerable and share with me in the moment so that I would get a transfer. And I started to realize that the value of a gift isn't in the receiver, it's in the giver, because the giver, really ascribes the value of the gift. And if it's done any other way than that, then the receiver is wide open to be disappointed and wide open to be, like, what's this all about, and not understand. But the sharing of an emotional moment, having a moment with another human being, the thing makes no difference. It's the emotional attachment and that exchange of energy that is just so powerful and so wonderful.
Hmm. And I think people do it in different ways. Like for your friend, it was the gum wrapper. For
Yeah,
some people, it's like the way they cook a meal for you and the fact that they thought about what you like and what foods are your favorite foods,
right.
or that means a lot, and I think, when I go to my sister and my brother and sister-in-laws, my sister-in-law is so careful to make, she's always like, okay, because she knows I have all these dietary restrictions, because I have all these sensitivities, and so she's always like, oh, what can you eat now?
Right.
And so concerned about the fact that everyone should have what they need. And that's her expression of love, like that's the way she loves people. And then I'll go there, and I think that, now my expression is love is like in a lot of ways is one is my spending time with the kids, because, I think they now like, they're always like, oh, the kids get very excited. My brother's like, Aunt Jan's coming, so we're good. But it's also this feeling of like the fact that I am really respectful and honoring of who they are and what they believe, and that has become a way that they understand that I love them, because if I didn't care, then I would just do what I wanted. And I would just go about like as if, when it's not in any way any threat to me. It's just a way of me expressing my love and respect for them. So I think that there's something about, no matter what we gift someone else, and I love that idea of a gum wrapper, you know, and I'm reminded of it, sort of like reminds me of, like, the gifts you make your mom when you're little. And there's this great poem by, I think it's Billy Collins, called The Lanyard, about this boy who gives his mother a lanyard. And he basically, it's very funny because he says, like, you gave me life and I gave you a lanyard. Like, it's really funny. If for the readers out there, for the readers out there, for the listeners out there, go find it because it's really funny. But it's so true. It's like, and especially as children when we give gifts. like the dandelion bouquets, like, I mean, how many of us have picked dandelion bouquets giving it to our mothers,
Yeah, and sharing inside tips, like if you take a dandelion and a or a buttercup and you put it under somebody's chin, right? Let's find out if you like butter. Oh, you do like butter. How about
I
me? Do I like butter? You know?
I know. Those little things of like, where you sat there but it's so true in those little things that we did. And I think that there is this whole idea of appreciation and acknowledgement of, and then I love the way you began, Bill, about stories of like historical stories, family stories,
Yeah.
um, and however that kind of those are transmitted
Yes.
to people, whether that be verbally or somebody wrote them down. But then you realize that like there's never in that way to me. I feel sometimes like, with my dad passing, I didn't ask enough questions and I didn't record enough, like I didn't ask enough questions as far as, and I mean, I chatted with my dad all the time, but still there's this element of like, as I start to forget things or something, and I'm like, what was that story again? Or who was that person? I'm like, I should have written it down. Like, I should have, like, somehow recorded it because it's so valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a corollary to that is the story about how, especially elderly relatives who tell you the same stories over and over and over again. And it finally dawned on me that it made no difference at all, to stop them and say, "Hey, you've already told me this." And in fact, that became like a breach of trust because if someone, who's elderly, like my mom and my dad, they were my mom when she passed, she was 70, 79 years old. But my dad, um, we got to watch him go through dementia. So he started telling the same story over and over again every time we saw him down in Florida about 25 years ago. And he had like a jukebox of selections of these stories that we would hear almost every single time. And I finally just, I was riding home in the car with Jan because it was an hour and a half drive, from where we lived in Florida to where they lived in Florida. And I said to her, it just dawned on me I've always felt like it was punishment to have to sit there and listen to my dad tell the story. But then I watch him and he just gets so much out of telling the story. I have to listen to it as if it's the first time, sometimes I got to make myself appreciate the fact that he is getting a lot out of telling me this story.
Hmm.
She said, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I agree with you there. And I think, in the beginning, when you first encounter somebody who's aging and maybe repeating stuff a lot or repeating the same stories over and over again, our tendency is to say, "Oh, you told me this already.
Right.
You told me this already." And even at times, you might even catch yourself maybe a few times saying that. Now, first of all, you realize that that's wasted energy because you can say that, but they're still going to tell the story.
Yeah.
And then
100%.
the other thing is you realize that when you say that, you make them feel bad. And so that was the other thing. Like with it was just like, and so you kind of think to yourself, like I would go to saying, does it really make a difference in my life that I'm hearing this again? No. Like, and so then it becomes that big part of it becomes insignificant. And then, like you said, you see the enthusiasm that they're telling it, whatever insights they have. And if you watch them, and even then, there's always slight, probably nuanced differences. And those nuances might come from you asking different questions and like kind of tweaking out, and maybe they share something maybe a little more or, a little bit differently than they ever shared before. And so it's just so interesting because I think that, yeah, I think there is really still great treasure there.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, there are days what I wouldn't give to hear my dad's boring stories one more time.
Me too. Absolutely.
And I would hang on every word.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to me the things we like, how, we were talking about this and how certain things like which really do make you smile, like the the things that you do as kids, which were so much a part of who they were. And I don't know that we necessarily when we're kids, we definitely don't get that
Right.
to a great extent. Like, I was talking about the fact that the other day, I don't know who I was talking to who was we were talking about running and track. And my father ran in high school, ran in college, ran in the army, and how as kids we used to go to track meets. Like that was a big thing. Like, we
Yeah.
used to go to college track meets because we'd sit there and there'd be a track meet on the weekend, and my father we would go to track meets and watch track meets, and just how those and my father always followed. Oh, I know. I was talking to my students on Saturday morning in the yoga class, and I would say when he passed away, I think we had my mom had every track and field news since 1950 something
Wow.
because he always followed track, even when he stopped running. I mean, Olympics, like everything, national championships. I mean, he always followed and knew times. I mean, he was very good at stats. So, but it's so interesting, like the little things that thread their way into your life and the fond memories that come. Like, I don't know if I was so excited as a kid about going to those track meets, but now when I think about it, they make me laugh because I think to myself, oh my gosh, how many Saturdays and Sundays did we spend at a track meet? Like,
Yeah, it was probably like just shoot me while it was going on, right?
well, maybe for like a little while, and then it would be like, do we really have to stay for the whole thing, Dad? Because they tended to be really long, you know. But just with that fond memory of knowing, like now looking back and saying, um, that was so much a part of who he was and what he loved. And so, what I wouldn't give to go like to sit down and watch a track meet with him on TV now
Yep.
would be, and talk to him about the current runners and, what their times are you know, and even as he got older, I mean, he would talk about it a lot. It was like the difference in training because he ran when he was, and just, the philosophy about training and things like that. And so it's so interesting to me, but that passion or whatever he loved about it, I would also love to ask him now. And I don't know that I ever did. Like, what
Right.
was it about running that was as opposed to other sports? Because my father was very athletic. Like, I mean, and he had the height, so he could have played basketball. Um, but it was much more like track and field. He was a big handball player as a kid. I mean,
Yep.
he grew up in Manhattan, so handball was big then, handball court.
Every building was a handball court.
Every building was a handball court, and he used to play handball on roller skates.
Oh my goodness.
He was he's really good. So it was just so interesting though, but always very into sports and so but really, just those things that about people which make them who they are.
Yeah. The leavings, the from a DNA standpoint, has less to do with their physical body and a lot more to do with their metaphysical self. The whole sense of all about who dad was, like that whole feeling. If you close your eyes and you just kind of imagine, it's more feeling than what he looked like, and as the years go by, the detail, and especially because his looks changed pretty dramatically from the time that he was, I would say he was always a very handsome man. He was one of the guys that women swooned over. I mean, they just did. Okay. He would walk into a room and he would immediately get everybody's attention. And I think part of that was his doing. but I think most of it was his older sister's doing. She she was 2 years older. My aunt Mary was 2 years older than my dad was, and his favorite story to talk about when he was coming of age was one of her girlfriends one day said your little brother. I just noticed his neck's not dirty anymore. I
That's
think
great.
that was pretty much the girl's reaction. Yeah, he's turning into a looker, you know?
He's gonna turn it into that's funny. And my father had the ability to go in and meet people and find out, like, their whole like like like, their key points to their life story in, like, 5 minutes. Like, he was just, like, amazing, and he would remember them. So he'd
Yeah,
come back and he'd say, "Oh, I met so and so. They live here. They know so and so." You know and, like and it was always astonishing to us all. It was kind of like, "Where's dad?" "Oh, he's talking to so and so," and he's gonna come back with their life history, kind of in, like, 5 minutes. It
yeah,
was just this gift of being able to do that with people. And and I think having being very approachable. Like I look at my dad had the best smile, and so I think that people always, and that was the one thing everybody said. Like zillions of people said at his funeral or that met him, or even now they'll say, "Your dad had the best smile. Herb had the best smile."
yeah.
It's actually his birthday coming up on Sunday. Would be his birthday on Sunday.
Well, happy birthday, Dad.
Yep, happy birthday. Been thinking about him a lot. So, yeah, I think that so if we were to like, not that we have to sum up, but I'm just thinking about our conversation today. And
Yes.
I'm just thinking about this idea of what we're talking about and what we've now talked about is the stories that even are like, I think we take our family for granted and we kind of forget they have a story. That it's like, oh, that's so and so. We don't really bother because we're family that we don't really need to get to know them to the same extent that we might view a stranger or a friend.
Yeah. My back in the day, we were talking about, why people get to 7 years and there's a 7 year itch. And the trainer who was leading a course on self expression and intimacy, he said, you get to this situation, where you wake up in the morning and you look over to your left hand side or your right hand side, depending on which side of the bed you sleep on, and you go, "Oh, you again?" Like I was expecting better, And the bottom line is that you're going to get out of life exactly what you intend and expect. So don't work on the things in your life, work on yourself and work on your decision on what you're going to have in your life. Create it and have it show up for you. It's an amazing way to live sometimes if you can remember to do it.
Yeah, I think if you can remember, and I think if you don't distract yourself with the things that are, I don't want to say insignificant, but it's almost like we focus on stuff. One is we focus on stuff that's distracts us from doing that.
Right?
And so very easy, especially these days, to get pulled out of get pulled out. Yeah. And I was commenting on this because I started using an app called Mind Jogger.
How do you spell that?
Mind Jogger, just like a
Mind
jog.
jogger, yes, okay.
Yeah. So it's basically a reminding system. So I was using it last week and I'm using it this week. And in some ways I really like it because I'm trying to like create like a mindset or create a mind shift habit. So it's like, what are you telling yourself now, for example? Like, what's the dialogue, that self dialogue that's going on right now?
Right.
And so maybe it's that. I'm just using that's not mine, but that's an example. But you could do it for anything. But so in the first week when I was using it, it was almost too distracting because I felt it was pulling me out. Like I'd be working and I'd hear the ding and I'd be like, oh, and it was like distracting me. And or I'd be in a meeting and all of a sudden it would ding and I would find it would kind of disrupt me. And now I think I've learned to kind of either ignore it or I turn it off when I just don't want, like, I need to focus. And then at points I turn it on, and however many times it reminds me, it's still reminding me. But I do like it. So it's this suggestion to yourself of like, where are your thoughts? Where's your mind going? If you have an intention, to bring back your intention so that it's kind of focused and in your mind, like it's kind of present for you versus where we set an intention for the day or whatever we want or a thought, and then we forget about it because we get distracted and life pulls us out. So can I give a little nudge? Good word.
Life is
Nudge.
always about remembering or being reminded. It really is.
I was talking about that the other day. I was saying how it's not that I think we always, I said I was talking to my client this morning. I said life is about reminding us of who we really are because we forget. I said that's really all it is. I said it reminds us of our different qualities. It reminds us, but it like is, because we forget.
Yeah.
We've
And if you're on the ball, you're going to figure out ways to plant little time bomb reminders that, like, your little mind jogger or whatever. But scheduling conversations with people is really good for doing that too. Have a really great conversation with somebody, leave them wanting more, and then walk into that conversation the next time you get together.
hmm Yeah, I'm thinking that don't be a dog. Years ago when and I don't mean that I love animals, but years ago when Tonka got in a fight with another dog, I was working with a dog behaviorist for him. And he said that dogs kind of like when they have an altercation with someone, it's like they push it's like if you separate them, it's like you've pushed pause. And then when you bring them back together again, it just continues because you
Yeah.
haven't kind of like controlled the situation. Like if you were to be able to control that altercation, then and sort of have it be a different ending, then it would be fine. But what happens when you just pause and separate them, when they come back together, it's just like, okay, we're now pushing play and we go back to fighting. And so it was really interesting. It's almost like don't push, like push pause in a way, but push pause to go forward in the conversation. So you end the conversation and then it's like, oh, okay, as opposed to going back.
Interesting. Life is all about creating the games that you want to play, and then remembering, and then forgetting, and then remembering, and then forgetting, and all that.
And all that.
So I think the really neat part of it is that what if we just said that every time that you're authentically expressing yourself, you're in the process of both giving and receiving a wonderful, wonderful gift?
hmm No, I would definitely agree with that because I think it is about authenticity and coming from where you're at that given moment. Yeah.
Yeah, really. If you think about, we are bananas with a very, very long go bad cycle. You don't have to wait very long for a banana peel to change color and not look all that appetizing. However, we do that too when we're not feeding ourselves, when we're not taking care of our chi, when we're not exchanging love and positive energy with the world around us and other people, no matter who they are. And that's a really powerful thing to take on and try. Love is not something that lives somewhere. It is generated in every moment that you're loving, you know. So if you again play the game where you remember to love and see what living like that looks like for a minute or two. Do it for a few days and just see if the quality of your life and maybe the quality of your stories goes up a half a notch or so.
My post for today was love is everywhere. And, it's just looking, it's in every opportunity. I mean, you get to practice that. It's self kindness, self love,
Yep.
and then it's, you know, friendships, kindness to others.
Right.
It's all around you, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's the word wonderful comes to mind, which means full of wonder.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean like cool. It means that awe thing that you were talking about earlier, where
Hmm.
you have a reaction, a visceral reaction to something that your body is basically telling you this isn't ordinary, it's extraordinary. And yeah, it's cool, but it's all these other things at the same time too that are just not explainable in words.
Hmm. Wonder's a great word.
Yeah. Having to do with curiosity, having to do with I don't know. How powerful to live in that space of not knowing and play full out.
And basically, that's life, because life is not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have a sell by date. And why waste our time not giving it all we've got because we think we've got more time? And that was one of the interesting thing. I don't remember who it was that said, it might even have been Buddha. And he said, the trouble with you is you think you have time.
I have so my mind jogger is actually a quote from Buddha. Actually, is my mind jogger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this whole idea of self compassion and no matter what you do, but this idea that as you're on, as we're on the journey of life, um, if you're doing any sort of self work, we can go through this very sort of like critical, like, oh my gosh, I did it again kind of thing, or this berating kind of thing. And, so the reminder is you yourself, as much as anyone else, is deserving of, loving kindness, you know?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And we're in a time right now, Jan, sadly, I want to report to you where there is a large number of people who in their grief at the moment, feel that it's totally appropriate to be unkind. And it doesn't make it better for the person who's unkind, quite frankly. And there's nobody who can stand up and say, you're doing something that's not good for you. If you took your grief and you channeled it into something that was good for other people, it would also be good for you.
Interesting that I get asked, at points over the past like 6 months with everything going on in the world. I think there's almost this feeling sometime of being helpless, like I can't do enough. What could I do? What impact can I have? And and I thought to myself, you know what I can do is I can be kind. No matter what, I can be kind.
Yes.
And that's what I took out of it. I was like, there's just like, that's one thing I can do. Just, and I check myself. Like and I try not to, like, I'm sitting there and sometimes, I like to use practical examples because I think life is, full of practical examples of like somebody who cuts you off on the highway and your tendency is to like that whatever just cut me off and whatever, maybe you speed up or whatever you do, or maybe you don't care, but I think most people actually get annoyed at least, and then just sitting back and saying, well, I have no idea where that person is going, so maybe they're right, like maybe they, for some reason they have to cut me off and they have to get to wherever they're going and it's an emergency or whatever, and that might not be the case, but I'd rather think that than think the other. And then I'm just like, okay, just that energy of kindness of like, and then this week we're actually on Friday, we're talking about grace, that element of like offering, like, you know, just offering a little bit of grace, like compassion and grace to someone, giving someone the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. The whole concept of graciousness,
Right.
which is to put yourself second for the moment in order to do a service for someone else.
And I think kindness is great. So that's what I thought of. I thought, like, how kind can I be? Like, that's my, like, that's because there's some, because I can control how kind I am.
Yes, you can.
That's one thing. I can make a choice. I can make a choice to not be kind, and I can make a choice to be kind.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time to watch people that we know and love choosing to be belligerent in the face of feeling like someone's been belligerent to them, but they can't return the belligerence to the person that they think is the offender. So who are they belligerent to? The ones that are close who love them. Oh, you're going to be here anyway, so here's your helping of abuse.
But well, yeah. I mean, and and like what we said, that you can be belligerent and you can be however you want to be. One is if you're willing to be responsible for that afterwards, and then
Right.
possibly like apologize or say something afterwards. This really wasn't about you, and I'm really sorry that I ended up venting because I just needed to get it out. So I'm not saying, but I do think that I always use the example of like sometimes, and I think we've all had situations where we get on the phone and we're trying to get information or something. We get rerouted like 20 times. And finally, by the time, we do get to a person and they send us to a different department and we're getting shuffled around. And by the time you get to the person you need to speak to, you're really annoyed because you've spoken to now 8 people and you've told your story 8 times. And I've caught myself saying, like, to people, like, on that end, like, if I do lose my patience and I am like angry, I'm like, I know this isn't because, like, you're being very helpful, but for a moment, I just need to express my, like, my impatience and and my exasperation about this whole situation. And this isn't about you at all, you know?
I find that if you include people in your stress and let them know that they had nothing to do with it, they will actually cheer for you.
Right, I know exactly. They laugh and they all kind of and they all tend to relate because I think we've all been there where
Yeah.
and you're like, and they go, "Oh, I understand," in a certain way. And so, but it's kind of funny because I have found myself saying, "Really, this isn't about you, and I'm really sorry," you know,
Yeah.
that you're hearing this, but I do need to vent at the moment.
We just keep coming back around to communicating the best that you can just for now. Always honor the other person enough to try to be at least um, respectful And with kind being the ultimate goal, being kind, you know? So
Absolutely.
we're at that time where it makes some sense to wrap.
Right. And so do you have something you want to close with, Bill?
I I I I do now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that I completely appreciate this time that we have together. I'm very, very selfish about this. This is totally for me. Now, I hope you all get something out of it. And if you do, then I think that's really cool. However, I've at least got to satisfy my need to be in an intelligent conversation with an intelligent human being at least one time a week. And this is what I do to satisfy that self-expression need. And I appreciate your partnership in it, my friend.
Thank you, Bill, as you make me smile. I think it's really interesting when we get in situations and it almost is like we're doing, but we're always like in some way, it's always like this is really selfish on my part. And I
Yeah.
feel like that a lot of the time when I teach yoga because I love to teach. So it gives me such joy that, and I'm happy that my students love it too, but I'm almost like, this is really selfish because this is really so much feeds me in some way. And I think that that's what you're referring to. It's like this sort of like it's feeding your soul, like these conversations. And I understand that completely because I think that we need that in the world. Like we need that in the world and we need that for like within our groups and within each other because, and that's what we need.
Yeah. What else would we do?
Right.
So we have to remember to do this. To thine own self be true, and be willing to discuss what that is with someone you love.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So, would you like to give our typical invitation at the close?
Sure. So, and maybe we'll just thread it on. Like one is if you like just don't forget to like let people know how important they are in your life, remind them, show a little appreciation to them, like they matter. Um and just remember to do that. Maybe send out a message. I know that Friday was like send a greeting card day out, like a hard copy mail greeting card of like, snail mail, regular mail. But also to me is like go out and say something kind to somebody. Like, compliment somebody. And it's really easy. I mean, and it makes such a difference. Like you'll see people's demeanor or facial expressions change when you do that.
Absolutely love it. Thank you again, my wonderful friend.
Thank you, Bill.
You're very welcome. We are lighting the candle, a world that works, spreading empowerment one conversation at a time, sending all of our love to you all the time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.